Okay, our next session is a two-person panel with Geoff Hale and Ryan Macias. Geoff Hale has over 15 years of experience supporting security of critical infrastructure with a focus on election security since 2016. He worked at the Federal Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, as an associate director for election security and resilience. Ryan teaches election security at the University of Minnesota and previously worked at the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, the EAC, as the acting director of Voting Systems Program, and at the California Secretary of State, where he led the top-to-bottom review, the famous top-to-bottom review of voting systems. Geoff, Ryan?
Thank you. Yeah. That's for you. Thank you again. I'm Geoff Hale. What you've been hearing a lot today and over these past presentations, a lot of focus on voting systems themselves, some of the changing policy environment. This talk is going to really speak to the infrastructure that helped support the security of the community, help to understand the activities going on across the board, and be as responsive an information sharing environment as possible. To do that, really want to cover a quick anecdote. Iranian cyber actors are in the news again. When are they not? But take a moment to kind of appreciate what they did in the 2020 election. It was October of 2020 when ostensibly the Proud Boys started emailing everyday voters across 11 states. Most of those voters were in Florida. But so just Joe Public was receiving emails from the Proud Boys claiming, I can see who you vote for. If you don't vote this way, I'm going to come get you. These were definitely voter intimidation. These were personal threats. As the public was responding by going to their election official and saying, what the hell, man? Like, is this real? As the election officials are curious, saying, I don't know what this is, why are voters receiving this information? A second tranche of these emails were being sent out, and they contained a video. The video starts with the Proud Boys logo, the music, Metallica's Enter Sandman starts playing, and then it goes into a hacking scene where legitimate voter data is being pulled. So it appears that they're hacking a voter registration system and then taking these voter files and submitting a type of mail-in ballot called a FWAB. Now, FWABs are not well known to the public. It stands for Federal Write-In Absentee Ballot. It is almost the ballot of last resort for military individuals abroad. And so it's a very bespoke artifact in election administration to be targeting. Now, this video appearing to submit thousands of FWABs is really intended, the intent is clear there. Don't trust your voter registration, don't trust elections, don't trust vote by mail, and essentially you should not trust anything that has to do with elections. At the same time, Alaska confirms that their voter registration information was exposed. It was not the voter registration database itself, but a voter lookup application that interfaces with it was exposing the voter file essentially through URL crawling. Configuration error that's not really excusable, but here was a legitimate cyber activity that gives a little bit of teeth to the insecurity of the election administration. Secondarily, DoD, who through their Federal Voting Assistance Program, FVAP, this is the organization that has those FWAB ballots. Now we're getting way inside baseball. They confirmed that they have a spike in traffic earlier in October and in late September, where thousands of versions of this PDF are downloaded for this purpose. So essentially, we're getting a collection of these artifacts. Nobody's seeing the full picture yet, but everybody's seeing a piece of the puzzle. These election officials that are getting all these irate emails from the public, wondering why the Proud Boys are threatening them, the Alaska highlighting that the confidentiality of their voter information is lost, the DOD saying we're seeing unusual traffic, and then all of this starts to converge, fortunately, at CISA. CISA had built the partnerships across the election community and sits at a very unique position with partners in law enforcement, partners in cybersecurity, and partners across the intelligence community to help aggregate this information, detect what was important off of it, and feed it to the right places. In this sense, CISA was able to bring this information to the intelligence community, who within really short time, we're talking from receipt of this information from voters in Florida and those election officials sending it forward, within 24 to 27 hours, this was attributed and returned back out to the public and defensively briefed to election officials in short order. So this turned out, the intelligence community was able to say, this activity is not the Proud Boys, this is Iran. Iran was the actor that had taken the confidential voter information from Alaska's web applet. Iran was the actor that was on DoD's FVAP website, and then Iran was the one that crafted this video and sent the emails to the public. The ability of the federal government to receive this information, digest it, and warn not just the election community but the public in the end of the first Trump administration was a tremendous success in combating election influence operations. This was a cyber-enabled influence campaign that really showed that all of these actors have limited insight and can see their one piece of the pie, but collectively you saw a full security picture. Unfortunately today, tensions with Iran are higher than ever, and nobody has that full picture. The information sharing environment that supported a lot of this has collapsed or changed. CISA has retrenched from a lot of the election security work. They still very much support SLTT, state and local governments, and there's still broad cybersecurity practices, but the individual relationships with election officials across the country and the election security team that existed before, that expertise does not reside in CISA at the moment. I reside here. And absent that, there's fear that not that each local election jurisdiction is more at risk, because they've been taking election cybersecurity seriously since CISA got involved. So this is 10 years of building progress. But what is lost is the ability to learn from incidents on each individual jurisdiction and carry that forward to partners across the country. In the absence of CISA in this space, the private sector has had to step up. Ryan's representing the private sector in this.
Yeah. So thanks for laying that foundation, Geoff. So kind of what I'm going to get into here is, so with that change in the landscape, is what are elections officials doing, and why should we, the general public, not be as concerned as some of the things that you may be hearing around election security? And Geoff said it really well, was, those relationships were built with the community. And we, as CISA, so I was actually one of the subject matter expert consultants to CISA working with that community, had built that trust and began educating the community. I'm going to actually jump back really quickly to the designation of critical infrastructure back in 2017. And we, the elections community, I was at the EAC at the time, and myself and another former colleague of ours were calling and saying, Feds, stay the hell out of our elections. We don't want you. As a matter of fact, we've been doing election security for so long, we don't need you coming in and telling us what to do. And I was in a federal agency telling another federal agency to stay out. And so But that trust was built and that community was developed. And ultimately, what the elections officials across this country started to learn and understand was, oh, wait, you guys can help train us, educate us, tell us what, put priorities into place. And so that was through a lot of the assessments that CISA was doing. We were able to work with them and kind of educate them and give them a plan of how to work forward. And ultimately, looking back, back to like the 2017 timeframe, was what they recognized was, the elections community is used to the federal government coming in and then stepping back out and not being there. So a lot of the states actually started taking this on in-house. And so they started building out, they were still using CISA services, but they were also hiring out other services themselves. They were doing pen testing on their own. They were doing cyber hygiene scans on their own. They were working with the private sector to implement the mitigations that CISA was training them on. And building out their incident response plans, working with their local community, everything from emergency management to law enforcement to county IT. We were pairing them here at DEF CON with many of you to come in and be poll workers and be temporary workers to help them, shore up their cyber. But then also working kind of across jurisdiction to implement physical security mechanisms. With that all going away from the federal government or the limited apparatus that is out there, what we're hearing from the elections community is we're still doing those things. It's just taking all the resources. We were getting it for free, or we were getting it through grants through the federal government. So we were actually having to divert some of our resources that could be going to other things. So ultimately, this is where many of us who got doged on February of 2025, came together and tried to find a way to create what we call the Village of Support. You can see it here on my shirt. It says, do you need election security help? Yes or no? And then on the back says, we got your back. Many different nonprofits and private sector entities have come together to utilize what we learned inside of CISA through the JCDC and through the partnership model to be able to continue to provide this support. I'm here right now, different from when I was talking earlier. I was talking as myself then. Here I'm talking on behalf of one of the organizations that we helped formulate, and many of the people are out in the audience right now, called the Election Security Exchange. And many of us were former CISA staff and or consultants who have come back together to work with the community to continue to put out the guidance documents, to continue to prioritize information, to continue to put out advisories and alerts based on what we're hearing and seeing, because that breakdown of visibility and bidirectional communication through things like the EISAC, the Election Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, have been defunded. But they're a partner of ours, so we work with them. Just yesterday, or 2 days ago, we put out an alert on phishing and phishing attempts that are going on, across the country. Because we still have that trust and that relationships, another organization came together, the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections. They work to partner elections officials with law enforcement, as well as with things like the local DAs and local attorneys general, to work at a local basis to help build out election security working groups. Another organization, partnership between elections and emergency response, works with the EMAs and so on and so forth. But then we're also working across the cyber community, working with private sector entities who are providing us information on threats that they're seeing on the internet to be able to share this across the community with elections officials.
So it doesn't replace what CISA, the position that CISA sat. Like at CISA, you were able to make, I'd like to call it issue spotting. You could shine a spotlight at a particular security goal or an objective, and you were very likely taking that perspective informed by your understanding of the intelligence threat, your understanding of the intelligence picture, and you were able to say, this is a priority that everybody should start to move towards. You don't have regulatory authority. You aren't moving the needle that way. You are just an authoritative voice armed with the the aggregate information of all the communities that you sit in, and then you're able to push the election community towards those. We would hear from election officials the value of this, that they could take CISA guidance and say, look, I need resources to be able to implement MFA. I need the resources to be able to take these security steps. CISA's put out guidance on it. This is the next important thing for us to do. In the private sector, we don't sit in the same intelligence-informed perspective. So there is this loss there. But absent that, this is a patchwork of communities helping to step up and fill the gap to provide that collective defense that was fairly strong about 2 years ago.
Yeah, and to what Geoff was just saying, like to be able to take a cybersecurity assessment that says, you should have .gov, and by the way, here's how you do .gov, to your county commissioners or to your state legislator, was a way that elections officials were able to get some of that funding and resources to build out those plans that I was talking about and to continue to improve on the election security front. And while we, as private citizens and as the private sector, cannot put out that authoritative source from the federal government, one of the things that we can do is leverage our expertise, our knowledge from being in that space to continue to put out those types of documents, to go out and work with those legislators themselves, or go out and work with county commissioners, or work with elections officials to say, like, this is who you can partner with to get one of those assessments. It won't, it doesn't necessarily, it may not be coming from CISA or from whomever, but you can do this through your National Guard. You can do this through, your county IT. You can do this through a state entity, or you can go to the private sector and getting something from, a big name corporation to be able to put that forward and explain why you are using them instead of, what you might have used in the past, is the way that elections officials are continuing to operate moving forward, into 2026.
Largely, the takeaway should be that you're less concerned about the individual impacts of federal retrenchment on individual counties and locations. They have really stepped up to mature their own cyber practices. What is lost in the networking, in the information sharing environment, is that it's now harder for every single jurisdiction to learn lessons from incidents that occur across the environment. So absent that connectivity, we've just essentially made it harder. There are teams stepping up to attempt to share that, but without connectivity across the full breadth of election officials across the country, it isn't easy.
And the last thing that I'll say there is, I know from working with many of you over the years on, vulnerability disclosures and so on and so forth, is both the elections community, but also the research community is also asking, who do we go to now? In many cases, CISA still has its CVD program, and it's, you could go there, but in many cases, they don't have that expertise to be able, that we all provided from the elections community to put it into context, to work through, and or to then connect them back to the elections office. And so to be able to help, kind of with that information sharing back and forth, up and down, bidirectionally. And so that is another thing to for you all, is to think about is, how do you all build that relationship with your local community if you're going to be doing some sort of research, and kind of continue to build that trust without that intermediary in between. Yeah, and really that's it. We'll take questions here if anyone has any questions, and we'll go from there. Yeah. Go ahead, Nick.
Do you think I don't want to say privatization of election security now that these government entities are kind of backing away, is that better or worse overall?
So I don't know that it's either. I think that we should have both. Again, so what we were talking about is there is not that entity that has the full visibility and the full picture and the trust that was there. It took time to be built, but through the federal government, there are different agencies and organizations. So, you have the EAC, but they didn't focus on security. You had CISA, who did focus on security, and you had that entity that kind of had the full visibility and be able to work across internally in the federal government. We still need that. But then the privatization is, in terms of who can actually provide mitigations and everything else. We as an elections community have always relied upon, the privatization. We talk about here voting system vendors, and they get, a lot of the hype because that's the one thing that voters tend to interact with. But you have voter registration vendors, you've got cybersecurity vendors, you got MSPs, and so the privatization has always been there. A lot of entities and organizations have always been in a consulting role to work with the community. The one thing that I did miss and I did want to talk about is when I was talking about this village of support, I know particularly here in the voting village, the vendors get shit on a lot. I will tell you, they have stepped up. They continue to work together as an organization through what CISA had stood up, which was called the Sector Coordinating Council. CISA shut that down through CPAC and like some other things, but the Sector Coordinating Council said this is important enough to all of us, even as competitors, to maintain this relationship because we touch all 8,800 jurisdictions across the country, and so we are going to continue to operate independently as an entity. We just met yet again. We're doing tabletop exercises ourselves. And so that community has really has maintained, that relationship and has recognized that, we might have to continue to do this on our own, but it's that important for us to continue to show that we aren't backing down either. We're continuing to move forward.
To your question as well, I like that the individual responsibility of cybersecurity is being shouldered by election jurisdictions. I did not want election jurisdictions solely dependent on CISA services. That's not the point of CISA services. They're educational in a large way. I used to think of them essentially as a gateway into the information environment. Here's this no-cost service that you could see, and if you're engaging with us to get cyber hygiene or to get a remote penetration test or something like that, then you already know who we are. And so when you're asking another cybersecurity question, you're going to turn to the people that you last spoke to, which hopefully was us at CISA. So really, the important thing in my old hat at CISA was knitting together that environment that when you'd hear something on the news, when you'd hear something from advocates, you were able to reach out to the right people to get ground truth on what happened in that election, in that county, in that jurisdiction, in that township. And that was largely done by offering the carrot of no-cost services. But it shouldn't have been the total solution. Anything else?
Yeah, next question.
Yeah. So, in the wake of the 2024 election, a lot of conspiracy theories going around, sort of billionaires on bitter theory. How do we know that didn't happen? What are the ways that we are looking at past lessons that we work with the great nation of citizens? Certain questions.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I will say, yeah. So he was basically saying, looking back at some of the things that came out of 2024, and the narratives that were happening since 2024. How do we know some of those things didn't happen? Like, where's the evidence disputing some of those things? And what I will say is that what the public doesn't recognize is how many steps are taken to actually audit these elections. And it is not, when we talk about audits, and I won't talk about it because Philip's in the room, and if you want to talk RLAs, go talk to Philip, but it's not just a tabulation audit. It is the ballot reconciliation, where you're actually looking at every person that checked in on the voter rolls to make sure that that number matches the number of votes that have occurred. But more importantly is our elections have never been more scrutinized in American history. history than they are now, and rightfully so. And we still have no evidence of tampering sufficient to overturn an election. And so through multiple court cases, through multiple audits, through multiple hand counts, the evidence has shown over and over again that the elections were accurate and the right people were seated in the seat that they were running for. And so that's what I would say.
I know what you're talking about. But there is a group on groups, statistical analysis using the model for that found models are quite great. Ultimately, the public paper in the house, pretty good at those kind of things. When you try to get anybody to look at it, they did one. Said, but there's no skills to prove it. These are certain little types, after certain book counts on type of machines, not a really the data has been peer reviewed, the data has been reviewed outside, and there's greater nobody will work. So maybe nothing happened, but when you in this state, after 300 ballot counties on the early vote only, you will see that there are horizontal lines and a number of ballots counted. Trump, if you do ballots, say bids in 100, get 60% of parts first group. 60, 40, 60, 40, 60, 40, 60, 40, 10 times. This is the analysis that has been shown because I've been created, sat in green, and it's so nobody will look at that. Maybe it's wrong. Maybe this statistical analysis is wrong. They're willing to say that. They're like, we're fine. If you tell us we're wrong, you can't get a big ballot audit. It's against the data. And it's not one group that has the data. It's multiple groups that has the data. When you go to court, there is no way to get this power. So I fear that we have so definite that nothing possibly could happen to it in order to discuss. Dr. Walton is one who founded the field work for USFD and use these models on other people. And we would go in and look at it after we found something anomalous. No one's saying that they know what happened. They're just saying there are large-scale, non-communicating patterns, such as horizontal lines and ballots counted between the parents and partners.
Yeah, and I mean, without getting into details and everything else, but what I will say is it's not that nobody is looking at the data. As somebody who has actually been on the stand and has analyzed data and has had to write reports back to the courts, recognizing that both sides have presented evidence. Both sides have, I know in many cases it's like, oh, well, the evidence is never reviewed because it was thrown out of court on a technicality or whatever the case may be. I will tell you that I personally have testified as an expert witness in at least 5 different cases, and evidence was presented on both sides. The court of law, came through and did what it does. But also, elections officials, when this information is brought to them, they've conducted their own audits. And so if you think about, when what happened in Antrim County, they said, all right, well, we know it's been corrected. We know that we've done audits. We know that the outcome is correct. But you know what? Because you're still questioning it, we're going to sit down and we're going to do 100% manual count. And we're going to go through this process. And by the way, our entire certification process is public. So come down and watch. You can see all of the reconciliation steps, and you can see the data across itself to be able to determine, you don't have to trust me, you can sit there and do it. All these tests, all of these certification processes, all these reconciliations, all these audits are done by bipartisan teams of public. And so, my thing that I would say is, if you are questioning it, or if somebody's writing a report and saying that there's something to be questioned, get involved. Like, don't come out with something. Go and be a poll worker. Go and become an auditor. Go work with the jurisdiction so that you can go through it yourself.
Just to clarify, these are independent groups that were working for any party, and they were just trying to determine that what may have happened or not have happened. So it wasn't like they had a poll in mind.
Understand?
They did the analysis.
Yeah.
One
Yep, one more.
And so that kind of being common refrain of if there is some distrust, go be a poll worker, go work and actively be in the system. As you said, historically, when you need resources, you can point at CISA and say, go to CISA, get their resources, and use that as a source. But since that's no longer as feasible, what resources would y'all recommend if we get involved locally? What resources should we pull from to try and help our local jurisdictions as much as we can as hackers?
I did not pay him to say that, but go to the Election Security Exchange's website, securingelections.org. But no, we put our focus is on election security, but we also have, a way for you to interact with us. And so if you have a question and say, hey, I want to work with my jurisdiction, and in many cases we can team you up. And so, like I said, we did here in DEF CON a few years ago, we brought elections officials from across the country and had private meetings with many of you all researchers who had told us, we want to get involved, and I'm in X jurisdiction. Is my Secretary of State here? Is my local election official here? If not, is there somebody I can talk to who is in that similar role, and then would you put me in contact with them later? I can tell you, just since I've been here over the last 2 days, I have already teamed people up who've come and said, I would love to get more involved. And I said, I know you're an election official, I'll put you in contact. And so that's what I would say. And, just as CISA was, you were alluding to the place that you would call, it may have been something that needed to go to the FBI or needed to go to the DOJ, and CISA would then find that resource. We as the Election Security Exchange are trying to be that same thing, is be that one-stop shop where you come to us, we work as a village of support across industry, and we will find you the right people to work with.
Just quickly, this was not a trash CISA for it. When it's specific to election security, there are now new groups to work on. As it comes to all other cybersecurity guidance, CISA is still putting out phenomenal work in there. So, consume that as best possible.
Yeah, I wanted to say, since before there was kind of a one-stop shop.
Please join me in thanking the Talking